How did I make it this far? Through the valleys and over the hills, I know it had to be God. How did I make it through the storm? How did I make it through the rain? If you want to know just how I got here, it's so easy to explain. It was God's grace, God's grace, God's grace, God's grace, God's grace, God's grace, His amazing grace. God's grace. Oh, I made it this far by the grace of God. It was God's grace, God's grace, God's grace, God's grace, God's grace, God's grace. It was nothing but the grace of God. God's grace. Oh, I made it, I made it, I made it this far by the grace of God. Hallelujah. Lord, I thank you for how you brought me, how you brought me through the night. Lord, you kept me and you never left me. You stood right by my side. There were times when I came so close. Old man death tried to take me in. So the reason I'm here today